What do you guys talk about? Like, it was hard for me not to do a bit of that, and I did do a bit of it. To be honest with you, I did. So right now, this is Marc Harris that I'm about to talk to, and his new book is Mike Nichols, A Life, and you can get it wherever you get books. How you doing, Marc?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right, man. Where are you, in New York?
I am. I'm in Manhattan on the Upper West Side.
In your apartment?
Yep.
Is Tony Kushner in the other room?
He is in the other room. I went and shut the door and said, "Don't come out while I'm doing this."
Now, like, he's obviously one of the great playwrights, and you are one of the great critics. Now you guys are spending an awfully lot of time together. What do you talk about? Is it mostly politics? Do you watch a movie and hammer it out, or is it just like about food?
It's definitely not mostly politics. I mean, we scream at each other about what's in the news the way a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of food discussion, a lot of what's for dinner, a lot of what are we going to do. And yeah, we watch tons of movies. I'm sort of the movie DJ and he's the food guy. So it balances out nicely. And, we were both stay-at-home writers, basically, before this all started. So it hasn't been that huge a change for us compared to a lot of other people.
Yeah, I mean, you got me watching movies. I decided, they sent me all the books, and I thought the one that I could tackle before I talked to you thoroughly was Pictures at a Revolution.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I read that whole book, and I'm very proud of myself that I finished a book.
Thank you so much for reading it. I'm these days I'm very proud of myself when I finish a book. I'm proud of myself when I buy one. That seems like a big accomplishment. Well,
what the funny thing is this morning I'm thinking about your book and I'm thinking about movies, and I had a conversation with my agent yesterday about Warren Beatty, who he decided he's going to try to get on the podcast. And I just read so much about Beatty in your book. Is that this morning I realized, like, oh my God, I don't know where my copy of Empire of Their Own is by Neil Gabler. I need the book about the Jews. I need a new copy of that. So right before I got on, I bought a new copy of that.
I can literally touch that book almost from where I'm sitting right now.
I love that book.
It's great.
Yeah, I love that book. And now there's a book I want to read about the Jews and creating comic books, the Marvel Universe, and Stan Lee and that whole crew.
Oh, that new Stan Lee biography that's about to come out.
Yeah.
I think it's called True Believer. That is a fantastic book. Just really, really worth your time. Yeah.
So the new book that you're out talking about, this Mike Nichols book, Mike Nichols, A Life. Like, I read a lot about, obviously, you wrote a lot about Mike Nichols in Pictures at a Revolution, revolving around The Graduate and his New York theater days and everything. Now, what I want to know is, and I've poked around in the new book as well, is that it seems like quite a passion project to decide to write a 500-page book on Mike Nichols. Now, like, I know Mike Nichols is interesting, and I was very compelled by the stuff that you wrote in Pictures at the Revolution, and I had no idea about his background, about his Jewishness and non-Jewishness, but why that guy?
Well, I thought that, it was a passion project, but I thought also I would never get bored while I was doing it, because I really felt like in some ways I was writing about three full careers, like
right.
a full movie career, a full career at the same time directing theater, and then the 10 years preceding that where he was this kind of game-changing performing artist. So it really did feel like I didn't know it was going to be quite as long when I started working on it, but it felt like, this is going to be a long book. It was a long, complicated life.
But, like, were you able to see, because I noticed that the levels that you were operating at in Pictures at the Revolution and really addressing how Hollywood changed through these 5 movies. But you were able to tackle it on all the levels, the levels of, cultural politics, movie industry politics, what it took to get the films made, the actors, the scripts, the writing, the selling, the whole thing. And, to me, it provided a great overview. It's sort of like, I read Raging Bulls and Easy Riders, the Biskin book, which is okay, but this was like setting the stage for that. This is pre that. Now, I assume that, like, you also were able to thread through the Mike Nichols book the arc of history that he represents.
I think I was. I hope I was. I mean, it's a really different task because Pictures of the Revolution, I had, 6 or 8 or 10 major characters to play with, and I was kind of interweaving them through a pretty concentrated period of about 5 years. And so this book obviously is one life through 83 years. I realized I would have nothing to cut away to, which was a little scary. The shape of the book was determined by the arc of his life. But I did feel I could get into the Chicago comedy scene in the 50s and New York nightclub life in the late 50s and 60s and Broadway in the mid-60s and Hollywood in the 70s. So I felt like, yeah, there's a lot of good cultural history and background for me to play with here besides just Mike and his particular story.
How much did you talk about Shelley Berman?
A little bit, because that was a really, intense, I mean, that whole kind of boiling pot of Chicago comedy in the 50s when they were all really kind of inventing improv was really emotionally intense, and particularly the dynamic between Shelley Berman and Mike Nichols and Elaine May. I mean, Shelley Berman really wanted to be the third guy in a trio, and he also really wanted to work with Elaine May. It's just about
I know.
Man
Believe
did.
me, I interviewed Shelley before he died. I drove to his house and sat there with him. He for some reason he had a large knife collection, Shelley Berman.
Wow.
And he said that the only reason that he did a foam bit, which was half his bits, was because Elaine May wouldn't do it with him. He said that's how he came up with the foam bit, is that he had planned those things to be 2 people, but because Elaine May wouldn't do it because she was with Mike, he had to do it on his own, the foam bit.
Well, it sounded to me like there were so few women in the Compass Players and that whole scene that, to get with Elaine May meant that you had, a chance to do a 2-character thing on stage. And so everybody wanted her. And Mike Nichols was pretty blunt about talking about the degree to which he kind of stiff-armed Shelley Berman and said, nope, she's mine. You can't go anywhere near her.
Believe me, that's just one on the large list of the reasons Shelley Berman is bitter. Yeah, he's passed away, sadly. But boy, get him going about Bob Newhart. There's no end to that one.
Wow, that's amazing.
These guys, some of them don't get any happier as time goes on.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So you were able to you knew Mike Nichols, correct?
I did in the last probably 12 or 14 years of his life when he was in his 70s.
Now, were you making notes for that then? I mean, has this book been in the works that long?
No, not at all. I didn't. First of all, I don't think I would ever try to write a biography of someone who is alive. That just seems like, I mean, biographies are already such a big mountain to climb, and I felt that Mike was figuratively looking over my shoulder, correcting me, amending me the whole time. If there had been someone literally there, that would have been too much. So I urged Mike a few times to write his autobiography, which he was not interested in doing, but I never thought of it until after he passed away in 2014.
And what do you think, because I know that in Pictures at Revolution, what do you think it was? Because he seemed to be kind of gifted in a very unique way around how he engaged with actors and, what he expected both in theater and in film. I mean, what was it? How did he change theater?
This was one of the hardest things for me to reconstruct in the book because, of course, I can't go back and see, Barefoot in the Park in 1963.
Right.
And when you read the play, you think, oh, this is a sort of pretty typical comedy of its time, just in terms of the lines. And so I was really surprised to hear from so many people who had seen it that, no, it wasn't that at all. It was something really new. Uh-huh. And the new thing that they said Mike brought to it was that in between these very snappy, like one after another lines, he would find all these little gifts of realistic, recognizable human behavior to give to the actors, so that they were saying these lines, but what you were looking at was people sort of behaving the way people behave in the privacy of their own apartment. And that, I guess, was really new, and that was very Mike, like finding the perfect little detail.
That's interesting because that's not really, that's not a method thing. That's sort of a choice thing, and it's sort of giving somebody something to do.
Right, and something to do that somehow expresses who you are really between the lines of dialogue or under the lines of dialogue. I think Mike did study with Lee Strasberg and all of that, and he was interested in the method. But I think it more comes from his work with Elaine May, and from all those sketches where they kind of figured out as performers that they could do things, even things that were at odds with what they were saying, that would instantly connect with the audience and make people in the audience say, "Oh, that's just like me."
I get, I don't think people fully realize just how huge a comedy act they were, Nichols and May. And it came out, the Compass Players eventually became Second City, right? Or parts of it?
Right. There's some kind of complicated split off where part of it became Second City, and but yes.
Wasn't Alan Arkin and Ed Asner involved as well in the Compass Players?
Yeah, Ed Asner was actually the first. He was a couple of years older than Mike, and he was the first actor that Mike ever directed. As he was an undergrad at the University of Chicago, and he directed Ed Asner in a very short play. That was Mike's first directing.
I bet you he remembers that his whole life.
He talked about it. He
Yeah, Ed's a lot. I'm sure he always was.
He was great. I said, what do you remember about Mike? And he said, he was very effeminate, but he was the kind of effeminate guy who would steal your girl when you weren't looking. So,
and then he talked about 9/11 conspiracies for an hour. So you're able to interview him?
Yeah, that was a thrill.
Who else did you talk to, the old timers, for the book?
Oh my gosh! Well, from that period, definitely the most important person I talked to was Elaine May. I mean, she was hugely responsible for helping me understand exactly what their partnership was and how they worked together. And she had amazing stories to tell about, like, how the first time they got up on stage and flopped at like the worst sketch they ever did, and why it was such a failure and what they learned from it. So of course, a lot of those people from the early 1950s when this all started are gone. I talked to, before he passed away, David Shepard, who was one of the founders of the Compass and was already struggling with the beginning of dementia when we talked. But he really wanted to talk, and you find your way in interviews like that. He found his way to some memories.
Well, it's interesting because Elaine is still very vital and still working. I saw her in that a play, that revival of that.
Right, the Waverly Gallery.
Yeah.
Elaine May was fantastic, obviously, like sharp as a tack in the interview, and just had really great memories to share.
Well, that's interesting, like how, like, so much of this, because that was the thing that I got when I was reading, the Pictures at the Revolution book, was that, I grew up in, you and I are really the same age, right? So we're like 3 months apart, literally. I'm September 27th, 1963.
Right, and I'm November 25th, right during JFK's funeral.
Yeah, right there. I got in right under the wire. Then they got him. But so, like, I grew up, like, our generation, it's weird because we're really not boomers. We're maybe the tail end of it. But we grew up in sort of the crashing wave of the 60s and into the 70s. So if you gravitated towards, what the 60s and 70s defined as a young person, which I did, film was very interesting to me. So I studied a bit of film in college. Did you?
I did, yeah. And I probably had the same experience you did, which is it's really weird being exactly our age because you had to kind of choose to, like, for me, I wanted to be a part of the generation that was slightly older than we are.
Exactly.
So that's what I jumped toward, yeah.
Because they seemed the smartest and the funniest and the most engaged. It seemed like so many things were defined. Well, I mean, even if you think about rock and roll starting in 1957, which was our parents, that, like, the whole idea of modern art, film criticism, taking risks creatively, it all happened just before we became conscious of what